Hey everybody at Central First Baptist. I miss seeing you guys. It's been an interesting time, a lot of interesting haircuts, hairdos, hairstyles, a lot of new ways that we have come up to discover to eat at home, things to do at home. It's been an interesting last couple months, and it's been nice in the last couple days to see people out and about, eating in restaurants. I've seen grandchildren or grandparents, people walking down the street. So it's been nice to see that in the last couple of days. So this morning, what I like to do is just talk a little bit about what do we do with this time? What are we gonna come out of this time like? And so as we use our time during this time of isolation, I just want you to think about the question, are you surviving this or are you thriving through this? When I worked at Kaiser Permanente, it's a hospital system out in Los Angeles, it was where you kind of became a member to be a part of that hospital system, and the membership was declining, and they had a big marketing meeting, and they came up with the phrase thrive, because they didn't want to just treat people, they wanted the people to thrive. And so that's what I want for us as a church, to thrive through this time. And what I want to look at today is someone else who was caught in isolation, who he was actually isolated in a cave. That was King David in the cave of Adullam. And so we are here at this beautiful Memorial Scroll Park by the Clemson Stadium, which is a remembrance of all of our military. And King David actually had a military history of his own. He was just a shepherd boy playing his harp with the sheep, and one of the smallest of his brothers, and he was anointed and called out by God to be king. And things went really well from him in the beginning. He went from playing the harp for the sheep to he got a gig playing before the king, and then he was just on a food run one day, and came upon, when the Philistines attacked, came upon Goliath, and everybody was scared, and David stood up to Goliath and took him out. And then he was then placed in the military, rose up through the military ranks, married the daughter of the king, and became in charge of the military. But things went south for him. So his being anointed, which started out really well, all of a sudden things turned bad when King Saul got jealous, and after he found out about David being anointed as king, and he wasn't going to be king anymore, so he started to seek to kill David. So David then lost everything. He lost in one day, a matter of a day. He lost his job. He lost his friends. He didn't see his mentor anymore. His best friend, he didn't see him but a couple more times. His priest was killed, and his wife sold him out to her dad. And so he was on the run, and he finds himself in the cave of Adullam, which actually means refuge. And so what we're going to look at today is his perspective in the midst of this isolation, and everything was taken away from him in just a matter of a day, and now he was on the run. And then what I'd like to look at is a couple passages. 1 Samuel 22, where it says David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam, and I would want to look at Psalm 142, because Psalm 142 gives us what he was feeling, what he was going through in the midst of, you hear the cars in the background, in the midst of this isolation and being on the run and taking refuge in this cave. We're going to get a kind of an inward look at what he was going through. I love having these inward looks at situations and at Bible passages and relationships between Bible characters. It reminds me, you know, Zach, well, he's kind of not working right now for Clemson, but when he works the games, he comes home and he tells me all the interactions that goes on during the game, and all the things they're talking about on the headsets as he's broadcasting the game on television. And so I love to hear about all those interactions and what's happening. That's what we get to see right here in Psalm 142, is what is going on in David's mind. The first thing that we see is that he becomes very honest with his situation. And honesty breeds intimacy. When you get honest, when you start becoming very honest about where you're at in your situation, your relationship. If those of you who've been married for a long time, you know that the honesty is the soil from which your relationship grows. And so that's what we see here in Psalm 142. He becomes very honest with his relationship with God. He says, with my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for the mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. It's so important in our relationships that we have this honesty. We oftentimes want to act like our relationship with God is always perfect. And then when we portray our relationship to others and talk about it, or somebody asks you how you're doing, well, oh, great, it's good, God is good, everything's good. But we see that a real relationship between brothers and sisters in a church, maybe, in a family, a relationship with God has to start with honesty. And so through this honesty is how he begins to peel back the layers of where he wants to go, because he doesn't just stay there in this, because there is a mentality to always want to be authentic now and always want to just be real and say how things are, but we have to move past that. It's just like how GPS works, is we put in where we are and then show where we want to go, and that's exactly what David is doing here. In difficult situations, they can either break us or they can build us, just like pressure and heat can either break metal or it can form a diamond. And so that's what we see here is really David's faith being formed and growing. It says, my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, then they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, and there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains for me. No one cares for my soul. So you can imagine being David, having lost so many things, and then being in this cave, hiding out, fearful for his life. And when he says, look my right hand, look my right, there's no one there. That's a reference and the idea, just like we would say. We'd say, I would say, Zach or Maddie's my right hand man, my right hand person. And you may say about a friend of yours, they're my right hand. Well, that's what his reference is. He says, there's no one there at my right hand. He says, I cry to you, O Lord. And then he begins to gain a perspective. He says, cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutions, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of the prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. So through his honesty, he begins to grow in his intimacy with God, and it begins to see a perspective. And we also see that the things that he's saying, that he's describing his situation, that his soul faints within him. There's no refuge, nothing remains. It's all over the place, where he talks about his situation, but his process is always directed in one direction. His process stays the same, and is focused on God. And so as he shares his heart with the Lord, he begins to gain perspective. And that's how we grow through our lives, is gaining perspective in our hardship, in our situations. And we also see here that he has some guys around him that has, just like any other person who goes through a difficult time, people also going through difficulty gather around him, gather around you. And he's here in 1 Samuel 22, we see that in the cave, he says, and when his brothers and all his father's house heard of it, they went down there to him. And it says, everyone was there, was in distress, and everyone was in debt, and everyone was bitter in soul. And so he was gathered with all these guys that were bitter, that were indebted, and also going through a difficult time. So even us together, as we go through difficulty and as we go through trials together, we can either stay in that misery together, or we can gain perspective. And that's what he does. He's honest about his situation, and then he gains perspective. It says he gathered them, and he became commander over them, and it was about 400 men, and then they began to take action. So the Lord gives him these tough guys. We can even see in Psalm 57, he describes these men. He says, my Lord, I'm in the midst of lions. I lie down amid fiery beasts, the children of man, with teeth as spears and arrows, with tongues as sharp swords. So he's gathered here together with all these guys indebted, going through a difficult time, and so together they form an army, and they begin to take action. But in the midst of that, he doesn't see himself as a strong man that is just gained in importance. He actually describes himself as a baby bird. It says, take refuge in Psalm 57, in the shadow of your wings I will take refuge. As he goes through this trial, he describes God as protecting him as a mother bird. And so he's like a baby bird, dependent upon the Lord. And that's gaining perspective, that as we go through difficulty and trial, we don't want to just stay hidden in our cave, but we want to grow, and we want to be honest of our situation, grow in our perspective of other situations and be completely dependent on the Lord, to seek Him, to seek His direction. If you guys are familiar with the story Pilgrim's Progress, written by John Bunyan, who actually wrote in isolation. He wrote in prison. The story of Pilgrim's Progress. The main character of the story, Christian, he trails off his path and he is captured by the giant Despair and thrown into the dungeon of doubt, and where he beats him. And so the giant Despair goes home to his wife, and her name is Diffidence. And she tells her husband that night, says, in the morning, go beat him again. And then on the trail also gets captured as Hope. And so he comes home again, and she says, yeah, go beat them mercilessly. And the interesting thing is Diffidence, his wife, is the idea of shyness and not going unto. And the lights just came on. And that's where we get captured, is when we don't come unto the Lord, when we stay diffident from Him. And thankfully, Christian remembers when he's with his talk to his buddy Hope, he remembers he's got a key that his king gave him. And it's called the key's called Promise, and they unlock it and get out. But the idea for us, if we want to thrive through difficulty and find opportunity in the midst of interruption, if we really want to thrive, we have to be honest with ourselves, draw close to God, grow in our intimacy, gain perspective of where we're at, and to seek the people around us who are also maybe going through difficulty, and lead them in a closer walk with Christ. And I pray this for us as a church, for you and your life, and I pray this, that we could just pray this together, that we as a church, we seek the Lord, and at the same time looking at those around us also seeking refuge. And maybe just like the cave of Adullam, which is a temporary refuge, maybe we can lead them from the temporary refuge to the ultimate refuge in Christ. Let's pray. Dear Father, just thank you for your love to us. I pray for our church. I pray as we are seeking your direction through this time, Lord, that we just pray for your glory, your word to go forth. In Christ's name I pray.